He experienced all that we have experienced. And don't you forget that.
I want, if you have a Bible or a phone or an iPad or you've memorized the whole thing, I want you to look up Luke chapter 10. Because I want to ask you, what kind of church do you want to be in this divine manifestation? What do you want to be? What kind of church do you want to be? And I want you to look down at Luke chapter 10 to probably if you are a Martha. Yeah. Are you a Martha? If you're a Martha, you've probably hated every sermon that was ever preached on that passage. At the very end of Luke chapter 10, right, is the story of Mary and Martha. And the story of Jesus coming to the door and knocking on the door. And one person, Mary, seems to recognize that this is Jesus, this is God. And she thinks, oh. And Martha recognizes that the carpet is dirty. Right? I have a thing with my wife. Why do you clean the house before people come over? Like, does that make any sense to anybody? Does that make sense to you? No. Sorry, I shouldn't look at you. You're looking shy. I mean, isn't it? When you think about it, I say to my wife, well, they come over, Carla, we clean, they make it dirty, and then we clean again. Why would we not? See, you get it. Yeah. Why would we not just wait? Amen. Amen. Wait. Who's a waiter? Okay, who's a Martha? Yeah, you see? And so every time you've heard this sermon preached and you're a Martha, you feel really bad, right? Because Mary sits at the foot of Jesus and Martha goes and prepares a meal and cleans the house and gets the sheets ready for bed, so for the guest and all of those kinds of things, right? Now I want to say something to you. I think every one of those sermons was wrong. What if it isn't about being and doing? Because that's generally what they say, you know. She wants to sit at the feet. What if Mary has done this to Martha before? Have you ever thought of that? Yes. It's cumulative. In other words, she has done this over and over to Martha, and Martha is just so frustrated that she had to go to the kitchen, right? Because Mary does this to her all the time. I love the Gospels. Oh, I forgot there's a camera, isn't there? Sorry about that. I should have warned you I was a mover. I love the Gospels because they tell the story differently about Jesus. Have you ever noticed that? And there was a time when people got a little nervous about that idea. And they created what they called a harmony of the gospel, trying to make it all sound like it was the same story. But why would you do that? I think the authenticity of the New Testament is found in the fact that the gospel writers and their experience of Jesus is very, very different. Line up 4 newspapers. The Globe and Mail, Canada's national newspaper that sounds strangely like Toronto. Right? The Toronto Star, which leans to the left with the Liberals, right? Your neighborhood paper, and whatever other paper you read. Line those up, take the same story, and you will notice what? Each of them will tell the story in a different way. And that's the truth about the Gospels, right? Like Matthew is writing to Jewish Christians who are in exile and who are being persecuted. Right? And he starts the whole story with what? And so begat, so-and-so begat, so-and-so. Have you ever wondered why? Like, why did he do that? Well, if you're going through persecution, don't you need to know that you're tied to something, a long history, to people? And he even slips in some women into this begatting, which is not usual for Hebrew literature, right? He wants you to know that while you may be going through persecution, you are actually, in the midst of that persecution, part of a long line of people, and it gives you perspective in the midst of it. Matthew is written also as kind of study book. It's the only gospel where Jesus is called rabbi. Did you know that? And so there he is, rabbi. And we get to the end of it, and we get to the Great Commission, and kind of, oh, by the way, go out and get some people and win them to Christ. And I want to suggest to you that at the end, the Great Commission is, oh, by the way, go make disciples. Yes. And the next question you ask is, what's a disciple? And what do? You go back and you read Matthew again. And then you realize, ooh, there's some interesting stuff there. The Beatitudes. People want us to be able to quote the Ten Commandments. Why don't some people start asking us to quote the Beatitudes? Blessed are the poor. Blessed are those who have mercy. I mean, so it's a discipleship book, literally, Matthew. Now, Mark is young, right? He's just really excited about Jesus. Matter of fact, he doesn't even start the book with the birth, right? Have you noticed that? He just, boom, he's in it. And it's kind of like a breathless gospel, because if you read it, there's all these phrases like, and immediately, and then, and then, and then, and there's this kind of speed that things are going at. And then he gets to the resurrection story, and he doesn't even end it right. Right? He's so excited about Jesus. How does he end it? Now, the women are going to not like this when I say it, but I'll say it anyway. He ends it with the women. They come out of the tomb. Right? Now, if you have my Bible, some monk 150 years later didn't like the ending of Mark. Did you know that? And he wrote an ending. It's kind of like you don't like the end of a movie, so you write your own end, right? So you'll see, at least in the NIV, if you go to the end of Mark, there's a little portion that they added, and there's usually a notation, because the earliest documents of Mark don't have that ending. Excuse me. I think that Mark did it on purpose. Okay? I think he ends the Gospel of Mark on purpose, the way he ends it with the women. The women come out of the tomb, and it's like he's saying, you're it. Witness to the resurrection like the women. They have to go tell people now. Right? Mark is breathless and young and excited about the Jesus that he's encountered, and he just wants to tell people about it. John tells you why he wrote his gospel. Do you remember what he says? There were so many stories I could have chosen, right? But I chose this one. And I chose these so that you might believe. So whenever you read the Gospel of John, the first question you should ask is, why in heck did he choose this story? Like, why is this story important? What's it trying to teach us? Because he chose these stories so that we might believe. And then Luke comes along, and he's a doctor, and he's a historian. Anybody in university here studying history? Yeah, good luck. Yeah, we're into science. There's no jobs in history. Computers, whatever, but not history. I know every time a student at Tyndale tells me, I came here to study history, back in my mind I'm going, okay. Yeah. Though I would say that a number of our students have gone to graduate school. One of them's at Oxford now in history. And he said, he came by my office and he said, they're paying me. He got a scholarship, right? And he says, they're paying me to go to school. I said, that is a good deal. And hang on to that as long as you can, because there's no jobs after this. But Luke's a historian, but he, as well as a doctor, but he's a particular kind of historian. He's what I call he's what I call a thematic historian. Do you remember taking history in high school and you'd memorize the dates and then you'd forget them a few weeks later? A thematic historian gathers stories together to drive home a theme. And that's what Luke does. So, you should always ask this question, what are the stories that are connected to this story? And in Luke chapter 10, you're going to see something that maybe you've never seen before. Like, maybe it isn't about being and doing, but what if the real theme that is being driven home here is don't miss the moments. Don't miss the moment. Look at the story that happens at the beginning of Luke chapter 10. What's it the story of? It's the story of a group, Jesus sending them out 2 by 2. They're all excited about going out. They're all really kind of pumped. And they come back, and Jesus said, so how does it go? This is Gary's paraphrase. How did it go? And they go, whoa. You should have seen it. You should have seen what God did. We cast out demons. We rose people from the dead. We did all, and we sang about that today, but they did it. And they just went, and Jesus says, some may never see that. What if the next story is another story of not missing the moment? It's the story of the Good Samaritan. It's the story of a guy comes up to Jesus and he asks what I call the minimal question. In other words, it's kind of like the question when the disciples say, well, how many times do I have to forgive before I don't have to forgive anymore? There's a great cartoon on that, actually. Because the guy, Jesus says, the guy says, well, how many, times? And Jesus' answer is, 70 times 7. And the guy, the little bubble above the disciple's head is, oh, gee, now I have to do math. Right? Trying to count? But this is the minimal question. Who's my neighbor? So who is my neighbor? He's already answered the question, the greatest of these commandments, right? But now he wants to know the minimal question. Who can I like and who can I hate? Who's my neighbor? And Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan and surprises him. The neighbor isn't who you thought it was. It may not even be the person next door. It may be the most unlikely person in the world. It may be even somebody who ultimately, you're not supposed to like. What if these 3 stories together are stories about not missing the moment? One is a story of don't miss the moment when God just shows up and does something. Right? Just out of nowhere, he just shows up, he acts, and you recognize that God is at work. Hallelujah. Now, you would think that would be the easiest thing to recognize. But I want to suggest to you sometimes even the little manifestations of God, we miss those. But sometimes we miss the big moments as well. I got carried away one time. Won't surprise you. I got carried away one Sunday morning. I was preaching, and it just felt like it was the right time. I was going to give an altar call. And I did it trying to be sensitive, because most of the people in the church that I was pastoring at that time hadn't been going to church, so they didn't know the choreography. They didn't know what they were supposed to do. So I did this kind of thing, and I just felt like God was moving. And 19 people came forward that day. And they wanted to be baptized. And we had done a baptism in the morning, or earlier in the service. I don't know, where do you do your baptisms here? Oh, good, okay. But, so it was still wet. In other words, we still had water in it. And I got carried away. And I looked over at one of the elders and I said, why don't we do it now? Let's do it. And he goes, you got it? Yeah. He's going, oh my heavens, what are we going to do? Like, we've never done this before. But he says, okay, let's do it. I remember this so profoundly because it was an old church, and 19 people is a lot of people. And about halfway through it, the stairs broke off the baptistry. Like they literally, and the person went. But from that point on, all the elders were there, and they were lifting people into the water and pulling them out. It was an amazing moment. Like we were just sitting there going, oh, God was at work, eh? Like, and it was so obvious. Don't miss the moment when God shows up. So this is what happened, though. We ended the service. It was, everybody was just higher than a kite. And I went out to the door, probably higher than a kite, maybe. You're like that all the time here, but for this congregation, this was a big deal. And went to the door, and we were shaking hands. And I'll remember this as clear as day. This guy comes up to me and he says, did you realize that the worship team was too loud today? I remember thinking, I bet you've had that happen to you before, right? God shows up and somehow this person missed the whole thing. Didn't even get it. Like you think, okay, there's something wrong here. This person is definitely not in tune with what's happening. It happens all the time. It happens all the time. From the smallest thing. I still remember she came to the church. We think it was an angel that brought her, because the church I was pastoring was right next to a nightclub. I used to say we're the other nightclub. It was right next to this nightclub, and this woman, she did the inventory for at the end of the night. I don't know if you, little aside, you measure the bottles. That's how they do inventory in bars and lounges. Just for future reference. Just in case you want to know that little trivial thing. And so she was staring, looking at our sign. And she told me later that, I began to think, okay, someday I'm going to go to church. And from behind her, she heard this woman, and she turned around as this dear little saint of a woman who said, come on, it's time to go to church, dear. And she goes, oh, well, I'm not dressed and I smell like alcohol. And this little old woman said, that doesn't matter. God doesn't care. And Diane to this day says, and I was literally walked into the church by this woman. She sat with me. She talked me through the service. You know, she helped me understand it. And she said, at one point the offering came, and she said, I'd never been in church before in my whole entire life. And she said, I went to try to get some money, and the woman said, it's okay, dear, nobody cares. And God just wants you. When I got to know Diane, it was about 6 months into she started coming on a regular basis. And it turns out she had an addiction. Now, this is the funniest thing in the world, but she was addicted to bingo. I used to say to her, of all the addictions, this is not one of the ones that I would have chosen. Bingo. One day, about 6 months into her coming to church, she came running into my office and she said, Gary, it's happened. I said, what? She said, I'm no longer addicted to bingo. Yeah, well, yeah, but I was thinking, way to go. I'm addicted to Monopoly. Yeah, you know, something like that. And I said, wow, what happened? And she said, I don't know if you know what an addiction is like. But she said, I started walking down the street and I came near to a bingo hall. And she says, it was just like it was drawing me in. Just like it was drawing me in. And she said, and then I thought about the church. And I thought about you guys. And she said, you know what happened? She said, I just felt something lifted and I wanted to sing a song of praise, but I couldn't remember all of our songs. I said, so what did you sing? And she said, I know it's going to sound stupid, but I sang this. I'm in the money, I'm in the money. That was her song of praise to God at that particular moment. Isn't that amazing? Don't miss that moment. Don't miss that moment when God just shows up. Even in the smallest things, but even in the dramatic things. Don't miss the moments that every time someone comes to faith is a miracle of God. Right? That something has happened that has drawn them into to God himself. The second one is don't miss the moment when God places an opportunity in front of you. Right? I can't tell you how many churches are missing those kinds of moments. For a long time, I was a consultant to churches trying to help them figure out what their mission would be. And I remember going to a church and they were right across the street from the biggest high school that in that city. And I drove up to the church, and there were amazingly, there were fences around the church. They had this big parking lot, and there was a fence and locks. And there was signs that said, keep off the grass, and loiterers and something will be prosecuted. I want to go to that church. Can you believe it? I mean, and so they wanted me to come for the weekend and help them figure out what their mission was. So we started saying, I said, what do you think your mission is? And they talked about this. And I said, come with me. And 150 people came with me. We walked out to the front door, and we looked at the high school, and I said, do you think God might have placed this right in front of you for a reason? Like, just maybe? This was your mission? Not something else? Like, I want to do this, but here's what God's placed in front of you? It was an amazing weekend. If I were to take you to that church today, you'd be stunned. The fences are down. They run a ball hockey. They on the parking lots, they now have portable ball hockey arenas. They started a ball hockey and a basketball league. They have noon hour events. The halls of the church are full of just people kind of. There's foosball machines and there's pool tables, and high school kids come over and they serve a hot lunch every day. And the church looks like a mess. Glory. Amen. Like, they were so protective of this place. Now it's got bumps and bruises and all that. But have you ever thought that that's what the church is supposed to be like? I pastored a church in the middle of the city in Edmonton, which is where my grandkids are, by the way. And it had once, you used to have to line up to be in church on a Sunday morning in the 50s. And by the time I'd gotten there, you could shoot a cannon and not hit a soul in this big old sanctuary, right? And as God chose to renew this place and revitalize it, all of a sudden, this nice, quiet place that had no children had 90 children all over the place. And the Women's Association had a room. I'm sure that doesn't happen here. But the Women's Association had a room called the Fellowship Room that was always locked. I've been in so many churches that have fellowship rooms that you're not allowed to fellowship in. You know, they lock the dishes up, they do all that kind of stuff, right? And I convinced them that it might be a nice thing to, since it was the only room that was in any good shape, that it might not be a bad idea to open it up. So we did. And, probably a year into it, one day I walked into the fellowship room. They had furnished it with French brocade white furniture. Okay? And I came in one day, and there on the back of one of the couches was two names in felt pen. Andrew, David. Immediately, I knew who it was. Later on, I told them, listen, next time you do this, never write your own name. Like, that is so stupid. They went, oh yeah, Gary, I can see that. I said, next time write my name or someone else's name, but never write your own name, right? But there it was, Andrew and David. I thought, we're in trouble. So I took all the furniture, I rearranged the room, I pushed the couch up against the wall, so that they couldn't see it. And then about 2 weeks later, Lucille Fricker, the head of the Women's Association, that was her name, Lucille Fricker. She came to my office, and she said, Gary, did you notice that there were some names on someone, Andrew and David had written on the back of one of the couches? And I went, really? I said, no, actually, Lucille, I did know that. I said, what are we going to do? Well, she said, well, what do you mean, what are we going to do? Well, I said, I'm sure you're pretty upset. She said, I'm not upset. She said, we got to figure out a way to be able to get that stuff out of there because it's going to happen again. And I said, you mean you're not mad? This is what she said. Gary, do you know what it's like not to have any children in church on a Sunday morning? She said, can you imagine what it's like for us who've been in this church for this long to be able to just hear the voices of the children? They're noisy, they're loud, and they make me smile. Isn't that something? Lucille recognized the moment. She recognized that God had placed all these children, and now they were her stewardship. She was to be responsible with them, and she was to take care of them. She wasn't there to police them, and she was there to give them life in the gospel of Jesus Christ. Don't miss the moments when God just shows up, but don't miss the moments when God places an opportunity in front of you. All right, I need to end because I'm the last person before lunch. And you're all going, What if the third story isn't about being and doing, but it really is about recognizing the moments that you need to pause? Let's not get into whether Mary really recognized it or not. But what if the story itself is a story about knowing when you just need to stop and you need to listen and you need to sit at the feet of Jesus? For a number of years, I had a spiritual director. She spoke into my life. I would meet with her on a monthly basis. And she would always ask me this question: where's God in this? I realize now that she was referring to Luke chapter 10. Where's God in these big moments? Do you see it for what it is? Where's God when he places an opportunity before you? And how would you recognize it if you've never sat at his feet and just listened? Just tried to understand what he wants for you in your life. Remember I said I want to ask you the question, what kind of church do you want to be? What kind of church do you want to be? Do you want to be a church that recognizes the moments that God is at work? Listen, he didn't just show up today. When you leave this place, when you go off to a university campus or you go to work, God is way ahead of you. He is there. And part of what we need to do is just recognize what it is God is placing before us. Part of what we need to recognize is that God is at work. He didn't just show up because you showed up, but he's way ahead of us. Amen? I hope you can be that kind of, because that's what a divine manifestation is. It's a people who are so aware of a God who is at work. And they're on tiptoes waiting to hear him. When I graduated from seminary, last story, when I graduated from seminary, nothing's worse than a seminary graduate, eh? Because they think they know everything, right? And I had so much to give and so few people to listen. I was associate pastor in a church, and I never got to preach in the morning service, and I was really upset about that. And because you needed to hear what I had to say. And so once, one month, the senior pastor, he said, okay, I want you to preach on Pentecost Sunday. And I went, whoa. Because this was the piece I had all together. Like I had thought about this, the church, the Spirit, the birth of the church. I mean, that was my thing. And I crafted the best hour-and-a-half long sermon that could possibly have been crafted. Kind of like the one today. And I started, And I started in the Old Testament, right? And I started with, you know what the word in Hebrew is for spirit? Ruach. Isn't that a great word? Repeat after me. Ruach. Isn't that a great word? It means breath. It literally just means breath. So I talked about good breath, bad breath. You know, I just laid it all out. You know, but then I said, you know, then we got to the Jesus part, and Jesus says to the disciples, you know, I'm going, but I'm going to give you something better. And I say, well, the disciples didn't believe that. Would you have? I'm leaving, but there's something better coming. A few women left me over the years saying, we really like you, Gary, but there's going to be somebody better for you down the road. It is true. Carla is my gift. But I mean, I didn't believe them when they said it, right? So I get to this, I finally get to the Pentecost part. And I begin to describe it. You know, the birth of the church. They're in the room and they're nervous. They don't know what's next. They can't figure out what's going to happen. And then, as Luke describes it in Acts, he says, and there was tongues of fire. And then, and I said, and then there was a great rushing wind. And just as I said, and there was a great rushing wind, bam! A window blew out in the church. It was the best. I mean, I couldn't have staged it better. It turned out that a meteorologist in the church explained what happened, some kind of thing. Took it right away from me. Me thinking it was a miracle of God. He said, no, it was a suction, and it sucked out the wind. And I thought, oh, gee. I thought God was actually in the message. No. But just think about it. I said, and there was a great rushing wind. Bam! And it was a stained glass window. And it literally went pop. This is what I remember. It's everybody's face. Because just for a moment, right? Just for a moment, they were like this. What's God going to do? Right? What if we're supposed to live like that? Maybe not totally on tiptoes, but at least leaning in. You know, believing that maybe God is going to show up. Wait a minute, he's already shown up. Believing that God actually might want to work in my life, that he might want to do something. What if we were made to be an anticipatory people? Believing that God will work. That's a divine manifestation. Amen.